That's something I really try to distinguish is, the difference between the industry, which is the executives at these companies, the companies themselves, versus the, everyday people who hold crypto. Voting for the candidate that you think will benefit your bags is kind of a short-sighted view, especially when that candidate's viewpoint on crypto may be very temporary and sort of campaign focused. Some people are like, oh, she just wants to kill crypto at all costs. And that's not true. I want to make sure that the issues with the industry and with the technology are known so that people can either address them or stay away from them.
It's weird because everything that you say is always so true. I always I don't know, it's weird because I
People
almost
are
feel
shocked.
All right, joining us on Coinage today, one of the most respected crypto critics out there and one of the most exciting guests I think we've had on Coinage in a while. Molly White, the founder of Web3, is going just great. Molly, thanks so much for coming on Coinage.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you on today because I don't think there's anyone who does a better job of digging into the granular detail. And of course, you've just done that with your new tool, Follow the Crypto, to dig into kind of where spending in politics from the crypto insiders and big players is going right now to influence races in 2024. But of course, as you've always done, you've also kind of taken a critical eye to the crypto space. We can dig into all that. And right now, also, you've kind of been front and center and going back and forth with one of the big names in crypto and Ryan Selkis on Twitter. And so kind of want to get into that too, and everything else that you have to say about crypto later on. But first of all, I figure maybe we just start for those who somehow don't know who Molly White is. We dig into why it is that you're so fascinated with crypto and kind of why you've taken such a critical eye to the industry.
Sure. So I got really interested in crypto back in the sort of previous bull run when, it would have been probably 2021 or so. And that was really when the term Web3 started to come up a lot. And I've always been a really big web person. I really love the web and am excited about the web. At the time, I was working as a web software engineer. And so when I heard that, Web3 was going to fix everything that was wrong with the web, I got kind of excited about it. Until I started to look into a little bit around what the industry was actually doing and, what the technology was actually accomplishing today versus what it might one day accomplish. And I found that it seemed like the industry was really taking advantage of a lot of people. This was a period of time where NFTs were really big. And so people were all trying to get in on the biggest NFT project. Meme coins were a thing, although maybe not as much as they have been recently. Um, and there was this sort of overwhelming feeling that you had to buy crypto to stay, ahead, to get the returns that you might want to see on your savings, to, secure generational wealth and all this stuff. But I was also seeing just a lot of things going really poorly and companies taking advantage of people and, projects rug pulling. And I didn't feel like it was being covered very well in the media at the time. And so I just sort of started covering it myself. And that ended up sort of taking off a little bit more than I expected. I think there was really kind of a vacuum there at the time. It's definitely gotten a little bit better since then. And so, that was really where I got started. And then from there, I've really just found the industry fascinating. It's somewhat unlike a lot of the rest of the tech industry in terms of the ideology behind it, the way that people get really almost religiously tied to it. And a lot of the political end of things, and how people see it as really an extension of their politics.
Yeah.
So it's kept me pretty interested for a couple of years now, and it's really become sort of a primary focus of mine.
Yeah, I think you and I would probably agree that it wasn't really covered in a way that I think was exciting or interesting originally. It was a lot of, my background's at CNBC and Yahoo from a financial perspective, and I think that's kind of what crypto was to most people if it was just number go up. And as you said, generational wealth to be had. And then it started to get into, all right, there's a technological component here and a cultural component here that I think we've seen now with the term of Web3 that wasn't necessarily there when it was just about tokens themselves. But I do think that you have kind of hit the nerve in terms of having. It's weird to say that a critic can have critics of her own in the way that you've kind of attracted a bunch of people who are in the industry who want to discount the truths that you throw their way. And taking on the powerful in an industry that is supposedly taking on the powerful, I think, is so exciting to dig into today. So I kind of want to dig into it first with your new tool and what you've launched in Follow the Crypto, kind of where that came about, why you felt it was necessary, and just the initial traction that you're seeing now, because I think it's awesome in tracking all the money.
Yeah, so that really came about when I started to see a lot of the contributions that were coming into Fairshake, which is the largest crypto-focused super PAC at the moment. Um, and I was really quite shocked by the amount of spending that's been happening there. It's currently at around $160 million that they've raised from various crypto companies, a couple of big ones, and then, but a lot of contributions in the sort of million plus range. That's really incredible from an industry that's not that big compared to a lot of other industries that lobby very hard in politics. And so I thought that was somewhat remarkable and wanted to start digging into that. But when I started to do so, I noticed that it's actually pretty challenging to do that. The FEC data, the sort of federal data on election spending is pretty messy and it's challenging. They have a lot of errors in that data, actually, especially when it comes to cryptocurrency packs. And I didn't feel like it was easy to really follow where the money was coming from, where it was going, who they were spending to support or oppose. And so I figured, all right, I'll do it myself. It's kind of what I've always done. um, and just to give a sort of perspective into where this money is coming from, and then hopefully to give some transparency to voters who might be, involved in, who might be living in these districts and trying to decide on their candidates, just to get an idea of like where this influence is coming from.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things in terms of why it might be difficult to parse out, obviously, I don't know, maybe this is just a younger generation thing, and I don't even know if I count as a younger generation anymore, but the idea of PACs in general in this country, I think a lot of people don't feel extremely comfortable about the idea of just kind of shadowy funds playing such a large role in elections. But I do think it is interesting in particular to bring up one that you dug into, which is the Stand with Crypto PAC, which has been interesting even for people in the industry like myself who have been covering some of this to see one giant company like MoonPay give $1 million to Stand with Crypto, another PAC led by Coinbase, or at least championed by Coinbase, even as you've reported on, it's a little bit murky in terms of where one line is drawn versus the other. But I have to bring up the fact that you recently dug into the filings and saw that of all the money that this PAC has raised, $180 million, only a little over 13,000 came from 7 people since its creation. That was not directly attached to some of the big players in the space. I'm curious kind of what you make of that and how surprised you were when you uncovered it.
So this really, I think, reveals something that Stand with Crypto has been doing for a long time, which is they've been trying to, they describe the PAC and the alliance around it as this really grassroots movement. They claim to have, 1.3 million crypto advocates or something like that. And when you actually look at the numbers, they don't really add up. And it's because they are claiming on their homepage to have raised, hundreds of millions of dollars, when in fact they're actually counting contributions to Fairshake, which is a completely separate PAC. And it's, not, it's really far from grassroots. I mean, 90%, I think, of Fairshake's funds come from 4 companies that have, contributed $50 million apiece. Um, and so they're presenting a really misleading picture around it, I think. If you actually look at the funds that they claim to have raised, they say something like $1.5 million of that out of the 160 million or so, 180 million that they say has been raised in total actually comes from Stand with Crypto. And then when you dig into that, you see that actually 13,000 of that has been raised by the pack, which is, kind of what their flagship fundraising goal is, which is, I think, really startling to see them misrepresent the numbers that way. So I did a bunch of digging into it. I figured out how they were lumping in the donations from fairshake for one, and then how they've been counting contributions both to the pack and to a 501c4 that they've created with the same name, which is, I think, where most of the discrepancy is coming from.
Yeah, I guess it's not terribly unique to have an industry raise money and try and influence elections. You compared this to the pharmaceutical industry, big pharma, and I think some of the other larger industries that have historically played a role in elections. But I think one of the things that even people who are in the industry, again, are confused by is exactly how many people are really in this space. And I think that that's kind of one of the things that clearly, as we've seen as an industry, has been faked on chain in terms of enthusiasm, whether it's for an NFT project or whether it's for, a DEX, anything really. Wash trading is a thing and people know it's a thing. But is there anything unique, I think, supposedly, in terms of when you dig into politics, where that starts to become something that is probably illegal to fake, and why I think through these forums it's been easy to identify at least maybe some of the stretched truths around how many people are quote unquote an advocate for crypto versus putting their money where their mouth is?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely provides a much clearer view into things when you have FEC data, which, like you said, you're not allowed to just fake it. Obviously, I'm sure people do, but there are actual ramifications for that. And it definitely is, like I said, you can look into the Stand with Crypto pack, and you can see that 7 people have donated to it. 4 of them are affiliated with either Coinbase or Stand with Crypto, the pack itself. And those people have donated 86% of that amount. Um, like I mentioned, there is the 501c4 that is receiving the bulk of donations that go through Stand with Crypto, although I don't think that the website is clear to people who are donating that that's actually where their money is going. And the thing about 501c4s is they don't have to disclose their donors. And so they are able to remain pretty shadowy and can potentially obfuscate who is contributing the bulk of the money. Stand with Crypto does publish on their website like a leaderboard of donors to sort of show who's been contributing the most. And that's nothing official. That's nothing coming out of the FEC. It's really just their word against yours. But you can see from that data, again, the same trend that this is not really a grassroots movement, because the majority of the money is, as you said, coming from a $1 million donation from MoonPay. There's a contribution from Gemini. There's a contribution from Brian Armstrong of Coinbase. And so, you're seeing sort of these same trends play out where they claim, a million plus crypto advocates, and then the actual bulk of the donations is coming from a handful of people. I would add that, the way that they count people as crypto advocates is just by signing up on the website. And if you go through that process, you'll find that there's really no validation that happens there. You can create an account on the website or sign up as a crypto advocate with completely false information. So, there's not the kind of scrutiny going into the numbers here that you might expect with, an FEC pack, where you actually really do have to identify who you are and where the money's coming from.
Yeah, I guess to pair it with something else that caught my eye as well, right around the same time that you put all this information out and dug into it, was another report looking at President Trump's on-chain crypto donations, which is another thing that I think Coinbase Commerce is the partner that his campaign had used to collect donations, and less than 1% of those coming from ordinary crypto holders, the majority coming from backers like the Winklevoss twins and others, Jesse Pollock from Kraken,
Jesse Powell, I
and
think.
Jesse Powell, sorry, yes, Jesse Powell,
Yeah.
coming from larger names like that. And I wonder if that's kind of also somewhat to be looped in here in terms of, okay, you've built these rails, but no one really wants to use them for that. and kind of what you make of the general, when you step back and look at it, just kind of the general story to tie it into kind of where you sit.
I mean, I think the takeaway here is that a lot of this political influence that's coming out of crypto is really coming out of the crypto industry. And that's something I really try to distinguish is, the difference between the industry, which is the executives at these companies, the companies themselves, versus the, everyday people who hold crypto, who trade crypto, who sometimes are customers of these companies but are not necessarily working in the industry, or if they are, they aren't at the C level. um, the vast majority of political spending is coming out of the companies themselves, executives at those companies, and then very wealthy individuals who have some stake, which is, the Andreessen Horowitz folks, other venture capitalists. And so it's interesting to me and somewhat confusing to see a lot of people who are in the sort of crypto enthusiasts bucket celebrating when it is the crypto industry that is doing all this spending, because I don't think that necessarily the incentives are as aligned as they tend to think. Um, what we're seeing here is billionaires, very wealthy executives, companies trying to influence politics in ways that ultimately will benefit them in some way. It will benefit their companies. It will benefit, them personally in terms of, if they hold a substantial amount of crypto, which many of them do.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that those incentives are necessarily aligned with these incentives throughout the rest of the industry. And so it worries me to see people who are, ideologically interested in crypto in ways that I really respect. They're interested in the privacy side of things, the freedom end of things, really jumping on board with people who are really just looking to protect their own interests. I think the crypto industry learned a hard lesson with Sam Bankman-Fried, and when he was sort of in Congress lobbying, he received some criticism for pushing for regulations and legislation that would be beneficial to FTX, but not necessarily to other companies in the space or to individuals who hold crypto. And I think we're seeing the same thing play out, where these companies really want to protect themselves. They want to build a moat around their businesses. They want to, protect the interests of the very wealthy. And that is not something that I think the average crypto investor will benefit from. There might be sort of incidental benefits. If they're able to push for regulations around, tax policy or the freedoms, to transact with cryptocurrencies. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, I think they really need to worry about, who they're getting in bed with. It's sort of the enemy is my friend, but I don't necessarily know if these people are your friends.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about all the incentives and political spending and kind of, so par for the course is par for the course. I will highlight, I guess, from, the Decrypt article here, at least giving a shout out to some of those people who did donate. There are, I guess, less than 15 of them, not founders or executives at blockchain focused firms, according to their reporting, including a Marine officer in California who gave $676 as a part of that 3.3 million on chain, but certainly not a large number of people or donations coming from those non-execs. But I am curious, Molly, to get your take when you kind of highlight all that. Somewhat of a fractioning in terms of people in crypto saying, look, this sucks that we have to listen to everyone's political views now. But also, you got Vitalik coming out in his own blog post saying, basically, don't vote just along political lines that would benefit, like you're saying, your own selfish interests. Curious to have your reaction to kind of what he laid out as maybe separate from what we're going to get into, the Ryan Selkises of the crowd. As you saw Vitalik saying maybe it's not the best idea for crypto to all align around one candidate.
Yeah, I appreciated Vitalik's point of view on things, which was really that, voting for the candidate that you think will benefit your bags is kind of a short sighted view, especially when that candidate's viewpoint on crypto may be very temporary and sort of campaign focused. Vitalik outlined, we should really be scrutinizing politicians for their views much more broadly on issues that impact the crypto industry, but are much wider than crypto. Things like the freedom to transact privately using, or sorry, to communicate privately using encrypted messaging, which is something I care a lot about. Those types of things, freedom to, access information, that type of thing. And I think that's really true. I think it's concerning when people get this really narrow view on politics where they're willing to throw out a candidate's entire platform and the entirety of what they're likely to do if put into office solely because of a perceived stance on one very narrow issue like cryptocurrency, which is not a primary feature of anyone's campaign platform at this point, at least at the presidential level. And so you're really just sort of taking on a lot of potential ramifications for what you hope might be benefits to, your personal crypto holdings, which seems pretty short-sighted, especially when there's a lot at stake here. There are a lot of issues right now in terms of the political field, that are really broad, that affect tons of people, and in my view are a lot more important than crypto. I'm not a single issue crypto voter in the sense that I'm not voting solely based on candidates who I think are strong on against crypto, and so it's a little hard for me to understand people who are single issue voters in the other direction.
Yeah, that might bring us perfectly to a man who has definitely demonstrated that he is a single issue crypto voter. At least he's a self described single issue voter in that sense. And that's the CEO, or former CEO, I should say, of Messari, Ryan Selkis, who you kind of, I don't know how necessarily, maybe we just start there for people who didn't watch this play out on Twitter. But I mean, even before I think I saw you attached to all this play out, Ryan Selkis was just tweeting himself a lot of things that clearly demonstrated that he was in this camp of single issue voter around crypto, including talking about anyone that votes against Trump at this point can die in a fucking fire, literal war, were his words, and some other inflammatory tweets as well. How did you kind of, I think it blew up when you just highlighted what he was saying, but talk to me
Yeah.
about how you reacted when you saw all this playing out, because as someone who's a critic of crypto, I don't think you can wish for a better kind of Twitter meltdown.
Yeah, it was pretty spectacular to watch. Yeah, I mean, I don't think Selkis is. I think his politics align with Donald Trump a lot more than just on crypto. That's pretty clear based on some of the things he was tweeting about, which were, based, to do with politics outside of the crypto world. But I saw the tweets that he was making, and I was like, wow, those are really extreme. He's literally calling for people who vote differently from him to die in a fire, and he's talking about using violence to excise the cancer on the left, and a lot of just like incredibly heated rhetoric around politics, especially after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, which seemed to sort of set him off. And so I just, took screenshots of what he was saying and posted it and was like, this is what, a prominent CEO is saying right now. I think that's, worth noting. And for whatever reason, the tweet gained some traction and seemed to help draw attention to some of the things that he was saying. Which were, it was not just violent political rhetoric. He was tweeting at someone who was, here in the US on a green card saying, I hope we send you back. Really just vile stuff across the board, just hateful tweets. And so, I think he kind of suffered the consequences of his own actions. When you say things that are that extreme, it's going to be challenging to keep an executive position at a company that has, especially if it has a board, if it has investors who are concerned about the reputation of the company and the ability to continue to get business.
Yeah, that was one. And again, I guess maybe as someone else who's in the crypto industry now, reiterating that Ryan Selkis, of course, doesn't speak for everybody in the space, because there have been people, and I think myself as well, when I saw that, it was like, okay, things have crossed a line here in terms of targeting one individual himself around the green card issue and saying, I hope we send you back. And his response being, where to, basically.
Yeah.
It was not a good exchange, I think, for anyone to say, I'm attached to something like that. But it then turned a little bit personal, I think, because that's when, after you screenshotted what he was saying, things from him started to turn and target you. So, I mean, at that point, you're now in this as well, including him saying that you're going to end up alone after feminism lied to you. I mean, what was it like when that now shifts towards you? Because then it becomes personal, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just highlighted that it seems like Selkis is dealing with some issues right now that sort of go beyond just being really politically involved. And I tried to take a little bit of a step back at that point because, he was tweeting those things, most of those things, after he had just lost his position as CEO. He had clearly, received some blowback because of his own actions. Um, and so I tried to sort of encourage him to take a step back and, maybe try to get a little bit of perspective on what was happening, because I think when someone resorts to those kinds of, personal insults that are, and if you look at the context of that tweet, it was completely out of, the context of what was happening in that conversation. It was like totally out of right field. And so, I was hoping that maybe he would take a little bit of time just to reflect and maybe not be quite so online, which is, I spoke to him and basically said, like, if this had just happened to me, Twitter would probably be the worst place for me to be. That's a very public place. You're not thinking reasonably. If you have the opportunity to take some time and like spend some time with your family or go for a walk or something like that, it might be helpful. But that unfortunately doesn't seem to be what he wants to do right now, because
So
he's
you
spoken a
did
little bit
speak
about.
though.
Yeah, we've been speaking, throughout this whole thing, we were speaking privately as well as publicly. And I mean, my end of the conversation was pretty much the same in both sides, but I try to be at least compassionate when someone's having kind of a moment like this, but um, you know, you can
Did you
only do so much.
speak? Did you speak on the phone, or is this all through Twitter DMs?
No, it's through DMs.
Because most of the thing, I mean, the other thing, as you said, basically, Ryan had shared that he was going to take a break from Twitter, and I hate that we're talking so much about this, but it is kind of somewhat fascinating in the way that you've played your part in trying to help the guy, including when he said that he's going to take a break from Twitter, and then there was a Polymarket bet that he wouldn't be able to actually do that, and you tweeted about it and said free money. Um, and it does look like he's already broken that promise that he was going to take a break from
Yeah.
Twitter. But I don't think you used Polymarket,
No.
because this might be one of those things where it was definitely one of them that you would have won easily. But I want to shift away from a little bit of that, unless there's any other final word. And to be fair, we did reach out to Ryan Selkis to see if he would want to come on and talk about any of the things to clarify his positions or share his words. Open invite there, I suppose, too. But when you kind of dig into beyond Ryan Selkis and dig into, I think, the real reason why you're so interested in crypto, obviously we're a community-owned outlet in terms of people who have RNFTs and memberships can influence things. There are some questions just in general, Molly, about you that I think people have a lot of respect for your coverage and understanding of the industry. I asked the question about Polymarket because I think there are some people who are curious how much you actually use in Web3. How deep you've gone down the rabbit hole. God save you if you have. Like, how often do you use it? Do you get your hands dirty in that sense? And what's been your experience?
Yeah, so I have used crypto. I have used a handful of crypto projects, mostly, in research context, not because I hold crypto or because I'm trading crypto. I do hold some amount of crypto, but it's a small amount, like a couple $100 or less. But I do use it. If I need to try to understand a project, I will, buy the token, go play with it. When I say project, I'm talking about the more sort of Web3 projects with like functionality versus just the meme coins or the tokens themselves. So I have definitely played around with it. I know how to use, crypto wallets. I know how to use a lot of the technology. But I'm not, trading crypto. I'm not, trying to make a profit on it or anything like that.
Is there like, I want to get into the criticism side in a sec in terms of the most egregious examples that you've seen from your time covering the industry, and certainly as your site highlights, there's no shortage of examples to point to. But on the flip side, before we get into the negatives, the positives. I mean, is there a part of you that wants to see the technology maybe used for good in industries, locations, countries where people might need more of it than here in the US? I mean, is there a part of you that hopes that all of your effort in trying to show the negatives might bring about more positive?
Yeah, and I think I've been very open about that, which is that, if the outcome of my criticism is that crypto gets better, like I'm happy about that. Some people are like, "Oh, she just wants to kill crypto at all costs," and that's not true. I want to make sure that the issues with the industry and with the technology are known, so that people can either address them or stay away from them. And I think it's really as simple as that. Um, I have been very clear that there are plenty of instances that you can look at where, individual people have benefited from crypto in some way. I think, anyone who tries to claim that that's not true is lying, because, there are a lot of people who've made money from it. For one, that's the easiest, I think, example to point to. But there are examples of people who, have been in really bad situations, who've been able to take advantage of crypto for one purpose or another, whether it's getting out of that bad situation, or, getting funds in because they, desperately need them but can't get them through other methods. Where, there are plenty of examples where people have benefited from it. And I think that's great. I think that if a technology, no matter how flawed, can help someone in a bad situation, we should only support that. But the problem really with crypto, I think, comes when you try to generalize those individual instances where it's helped someone into saying, this is the technology of the future. This is something that everyone should be using. This is something that can broadly help people who are in those same situations. Because that, I think, is what really hasn't been proven, and what really needs to be scrutinized, because I think a lot of those promises are pretty empty.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess, in terms of what we've seen in hyperinflation, and that seems, I don't know why, but it seems to be one that is constantly brought up in US contexts, which always seems, as we have a producer here from Brazil, it seems like a lot of times, whether it's Balaji's bet that, you would see hyperinflation, Jack Dorsey talking about hyperinflation. It seems wild to see people talking about it in the US, though it's not impossible to imagine that it could eventually happen. But when it's happening in real time in other countries, it seems a bit detached. Dare I say, disrespectful to talk about inflation here as being a major problem when you have people in countries like Argentina suffering through it. But that does seem to be perhaps maybe one use case, certainly countries where you can't access dollars to try and convert things. It does seem like one use case that maybe you and I would be on the same page of it being a positive.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, if people are able to take advantage of crypto to prevent, the losses to their savings as a result of hyperinflation, I think that's great. Again, the issue really comes when you start talking about doing that at a broad scale, because, you look at why countries, are limiting access to other currencies, those types of things, and it's, often because they are worried about people uh, you know, moving their funds elsewhere. And so, using crypto to avoid hyperinflation might be something that works at sort of a small scale when it's not, the whole populace that's doing it. But you tend to start to see countries cracking down on crypto when they become worried that it could be, a threat to their currency, to their government, to whatever, it might be.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I begin to worry about talking about crypto as the end all solution to something like hyperinflation, which, generally I think is, probably better addressed by, going at the root of the problem rather than saying, well, just use crypto instead.
Yeah, I think, again, it's weird because everything that you say is always so true. I always like, I don't know, it's weird because I
People
almost
are
feel like,
shocked.
no, but I mean, like, it's funny to think about, you and I probably aren't so dissimilar, but it is funny to think about kind of you being labeled crypto critic and me trying to use crypto to solve a problem in media. And it's just like, we probably both want the same thing, but for some reason it's different in the same way. But I mean, obviously, there's so many things to dig into, and Terra would be a good example of maybe showing, oh, yeah, that seems great. That was crypto fixing the problem. We saw what happened with that collapse, and certainly a lot of people in Argentina who use UST were hurt in that collapse as well. So it'd be too
Right.
simple to fit all of this down into one podcast recording and say, Molly White and I cracked the code, but would love to have you back to dig into things deeper. But I kind of want to close with just looking back on perhaps your experiment, if you want to call it that, project at Web3 is going just great, to highlight all the great work that you've done. And shout out to your newsletter. I was just reading it to kind of catch up on these things on the way in. It's phenomenal. So subscribe to Molly's newsletter as well in all of this. And I guess looking back on everything that you've done, is there one that stands out as maybe most egregious in terms of pointing out how maybe it's become quite easy to satire, to poke fun at the crypto industry?
Oh man. I mean, I can think of probably 10, but probably the easiest one was, I still come back to this because it was just a joy. The Crypto Land project where they wanted to buy the island and create the like half theme park, half residential living space for people who are into crypto, and they produced a whole animated video about it. And that one, that's like they did the satire themselves. They were so deep into to crypto and to crypto memes and stuff that without like a single ounce of self-awareness, that they sort of took care of the whole satire thing themselves. So that will always, I think, be a favorite of mine.
Yeah, I mean, and people were comparing that to Fire Island and or Firefest, not Fire Island,
Right.
Firefest, and the idea of it being a crypto Firefest. But I mean,
Yeah,
in
fortunately no
all
one
of
ever
this,
actually made it to the island, or else I
I
think we would have
know.
had to send in the Coast Guard.
The influencers would have never. Although it is one of the other pieces of this. There are two things that I want to highlight in your latest issue. One being tap to earn and the idea of these games, and the other one being influencers now getting increasingly. Scottie Pippen, God help him, talking about meme coins now. They've massacred my boy, my hero. But there is a video that you included in the latest issue looking at kind of this hamster token project, and again, this is also one of the things where I'm saying, God help us too, around the tap to earn being the thing that has so much money pouring into space. What do you make of this? What do you make of where we're at in that people are using massage guns to help them earn on these hamster games?
Personally, I think that this is the kind of innovation we've been waiting for. I love watching people come up with like really weird solutions to things like this. I mean, I think that this kind of highlights the sort of issue with a lot of Web3 projects, especially when you get into the gaming world, which is where incentives tend to be kind of warped. There's the idea of playing a game to have fun, and then there's the idea of playing a game to make money, and often those two things are somewhat incompatible. And sitting there with a massage gun so that you can tap out more points on your hamster combat game is not my idea of a fun time. And I think that it would be useful if the crypto gaming industry grappled a little bit more with that problem, where it's challenging to make a fun game and also introduce like real world economic incentives without ending up with weird outcomes like this. And you see this, it's sort of a microcosm of a lot of the industry, where a lot of companies just don't think about the types of behaviors they're incentivizing when they attach a token to something. Or in the case of hamster combat, when they attach like the vague promises of a future token, because there's not even really a token at this point. Um, so, it's, I think, just a fun example of like people just are going to be weird. They're going to do weird things to try to exploit the rules that you've set up. And, this is what you end up with.
Yeah, it does seem like, I mean, to use your term, warped incentives is kind of, that's why I got into the industry, to be honest with you, and why I think Bitcoin was fascinating. And there was one question from JR in our community about asking Molly White if she's read the Bitcoin white paper, which I assume you have. Um, and I feel like incentive structure in Web3 is the huge holy grail in the like the reason why a lot of people love Bitcoin is that it did kind of set up incentives in a way that was very interesting to match kind of whether you're a miner or whether you're a user or whether you just want number to go up, aligning incentives in a way that was very interesting. And then you got VCs in the game, and that warped incentives from the top down in terms of, well, now we have more tokens and we just want to go up. And it warped all the incentives from a community and its users and people. And so I don't know. That's kind of why the hope is you can use this technology to re-incentivize people to have mutually beneficial outcomes. But I am curious. Obviously, you've seen a lot of the negatives when incentives are warped. Is there any project that you've maybe seen where the technology has been used to positively re-incentivize people to create better outcomes?
uh, it's hard to think of one, honestly, because a lot of projects suffer from that exact problem, and I think there are projects that have, set out to do something positive and have maybe for a time done something positive, but as far as projects that have like at the long term continued to succeed without incentives getting warped, without the wealthy coming in and taking over the project basically because of the way that voting is set up or whatever it might be. It's really hard to name a project that has succeeded. I think the most positive thing that I've seen out of the crypto world is that people are really thinking about the problems a lot more. The like I said, one of the things that really got me interested in crypto to begin with was the problems they'd identified with the web were the very same problems that I'd identified with the web and that a lot of people have identified with the web.
Mm-hmm.
And when people started to get interested in Web3 for whatever reason, whether it was number go up or because they too cared about the web, regardless, a lot more people were thinking about it, which I think is really important. And the same goes for a lot of other issues in the crypto world, whether it's financial inequality or hyperinflation like we were just talking about, or the ability for venture capitalists to really warp the technology world, whatever it might be. It's nice that there are people who are thinking about that more and who are thinking about sort of alternative ways to go at it, to attack the problem. I was really fascinated by all the attempts at sort of crypto governance that we were seeing. Again, it's been hard to name, a particularly successful version of that, where token incentives haven't come into conflict with the goals of, the DAO or the, whatever organization it might be.
Yeah.
But to see people who are doing that kind of, outside creative governance thinking is really cool. And so, that's one thing that has always been really fascinating to me and has kept me interested in the industry is that, there are people who are doing interesting work, who are thinking about interesting problems. And even if the solution that they end up with, or the first 10 solutions they end up with don't work, they're doing that thinking, they are, pushing forward in some way. And so, it's always fun to watch that happening.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't necessarily set this up as a debate, so anyone who's maybe tuning in for fireworks and clashing a la Ryan Selkis and Molly White, that wasn't the instinct here. But it is comforting to hear you talk about all that, because that's essentially why I had quit and also appreciated some of the earlier projects, whether it be something as silly as Constitution Down and trying to pool money to buy a constitution, or just some of the other projects that have popped up since in DAO governance, like legitimate governance. For us here with our community of people who have minted NFTs to become members in a legally registered cooperative, I think that we're trying to press forward in terms of doing things positive in a way to realign incentives in what I think a lot of people agree is maybe problematic in traditional media. But alas, like you said, everything's an experiment, and we don't deign to know everything here. But Molly White, I appreciate it. And I also just kind of want to leave with one question, since we're seeing all of these things kind of come together now. You're also, obviously not just a crypto critic, but someone, as you said, as we started this conversation, someone who knows the web well. The next iteration seems to be everything tied to AI. And when you have crypto, there's a lot of people who are saying that crypto solves all the issues that people are talking about when it comes to the next evolution of the internet in the AI age. Do you believe that? Do you think that crypto is? I suspect it might not be, yes, but there are tools here. How do you see maybe how AI and crypto are merging in the next iteration of the internet?
Well, I think it's always a little scary to watch one really overhyped technology begin to merge with another one. Both crypto and AI suffer from similar flaws around, people have gotten really excited about what the technology one day might do and are less focused on what it's doing today. And I think that's always really problematic. You really need to focus on both the current uses of the technology as well as the sort of pros and cons, the ways it's impacting people, as well as where you hope that technology might go. And you really need to dig in when people start to promise you things to, understand if those promises are even feasible. I don't see a lot of promise in the projects that are merging crypto with AI, although there are so many and there's so many doing it in so many different ways. It's hard to sort of describe that one bucket, but people are talking about using crypto to try to democratize AI models and handle bias in training data and all sorts of things like that, which are again real problems with AI. But unfortunately are problems that I don't think crypto can solve. These models are being trained in ways that really don't sort of jibe well with crypto, and I don't see the models that people have proposed to use crypto for these types of things as plausibly solving those problems. Um, there are other projects that are more of just like a marketplace for buying and selling AI compute power and that kind of thing. And crypto, I guess, is as good as anything when it comes to doing that. But that's not really a problem you need crypto to solve. You just need some sort of money or money adjacent thing to be able to buy and sell things. So I'm not super bullish, I guess you could say, on the crypto, crossed with AI projects that are coming out.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see, and that's another piece that I think is always tied to crypto is the idea of network effects and growing something using a token to incentivize both sellers and buyers of a product. And now we're seeing that it was floated back in 2018, never really took off for some of the things like a decentralized Uber or everything like that, and now being floated again. Perhaps as maybe the adoption, some of these things will change, but it has been interesting to see again, kind of users stay scant. I think that seems to be a theme most of the time across crypto.
Right.
Molly, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Honestly, we're barely scratching the surface here, but I know we're at time. The founder of Follow the Crypto, citation needed, phenomenal newsletter, and of course, Web3 is going just great. Thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully we can have you back on again soon because, as I said, I think one of the smartest and most respected voices in the space, whether you agree with the idea of criticizing crypto, God help us, or not. Molly White, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.